Hi everyone, this is a presentation on breaking the rules in 10 story beats. And major spoilers for the following games: Mother 3, Undertale, Inside, The Last Guardian, and Killer 7. I know many of you have wanted to play these games, but I'm going to talk about them right now, and I'm going to completely spoil the ending for the large majority of these. So, in Mother 3, if you can read the bottom right there, in Mother 3, a turn-based JRPG, attacking or casting a PSI on the final boss, revealed to be Lucas's loving twin brother Claus, causes this message: for some reason, Lucas couldn't attack, to appear, despite the boss not inflicting any status effects on Lucas. So up to this point, like any other JRPG, you're under the assumption that you can just flat out attack the final boss. Turns out that is not the case. In The Last Guardian, there's a companion creature, Trico, that has a moment where they overcome their fear of stained glass depicting eyes to rescue our player character from his captors. Prior to this, Trico is paralyzed when they see stained glass. This is one of the puzzle elements where it involves trying to break a couple of stained glass so that the two of you can progress. But at one point, the guards flat out capture you, but in that one sweeping moment, Trico comes in to save you, despite the fact that it has already been previously established that Trico doesn't like that. And finally, in Undertale, also a turn-based JRPG, dying at the final boss gives you this message, but it refused, instead of the usual game over screen. So what do these moments all have in common? And I argue that 1, they break a pre-established rules, and 2, as a consequence, have a significant emotional impact for the player. It is, in short, a form of story and gameplay integration where the expectation of the player is shattered and given surprise as this new revelation comes in. So why use this technique? As mentioned earlier, it's a complete surprise. 2, it's memorable. I think if you talk to the people who have played these previous games, will say that if they have actually gone into that part of the game, they will say, I found that part to be memorable. I thought that it was very tragic that you could not attack Claus in Mother 3, so on and so forth. And 2, finally, it's a really great way of establishing a new rule if the twist happens to not be if the twist happens to be in the middle of the game and not like at the end or anything. Because sometimes you may need to reset some of the puzzle structures and so forth. So here's, after playing a couple of these games that I personally love, except I haven't played The Last Guardian, I'm sorry. So how to break rules as a technique to create this nice story and gameplay integration. 1, obviously, you have to establish the rules first. Make it clear what the physics behind the games are, what the rules that all the characters follow, and make sure that is clear throughout the entirety of that game and it doesn't break that. 2, consider drafting a narrative building to the specific climax. So as an example, with The Last Guardian, there's a section where a captor starts chasing after you because you have to make a significant distance away from Trico. So they created a system where the captors themselves has figured out, oh, they just have to hold some stained glass shields and call it a day. And so that's how this scene comes about. For this scene right here, the game establishes pretty early on that Lucas and Claus have a very, very loving relationship. And at the end, in theory, it comes as a surprise that Claus, this masked man that you've been dealing with throughout the entire game, is actually your twin brother that has been missing for 3 years. Mind you, in the actual game, if you play it, it's very obvious this is Claus. So that's not as big of a spoiler as it sounds, but nonetheless. And finally, in Undertale, it gives you this big, gigantic, we are going to fight the final of the most finalist boss you can ever imagine. So you're expecting this is going to be hard, this is going to be difficult, and because of the route's requirement that you must be at level 1, you will be utterly weak at it, right? So now that you created that climax, it's time to actually break the rule without letting the player know. All of these appear as part of the gameplay. They don't have any cutscene devoted to them. They don't do anything particular about them. Like, you can easily go through all the setup right here in this Mother 3 battle, where you just do some bunch random stuff, and not even know at all that Lucas cannot attack Klaus throughout the entire battle. They let that happen. They trust that they set the expectation well enough that the player is going to do that. Same story for Undertale. You're probably going to die because the game is hard enough to do so, and then the player will find this. And finally, either establish that the broken rule as a new normal, as in the rest of the game, this broken rule will remain so, or make it clear that it will not be repeated again. For these two games, it's the end of the game. There's no gameplay after this outside of talking to characters, which, fine, that makes perfect sense. I do not know Last Guardian, so I'm going to find out when I play it. So which rule should you break? For an uplifting twist, remove a limiting rule. So, example, Undertale removes the game over screen during the final boss. That's a really empowering experience that you deal with. And inside, they make it so that at one point, the boy can actually breathe underwater. Throughout the entire game, you're told that, yes, the boy can dive into water, but they're going to drown at some point if you just stay there for too long. At one point in the game, they have an entire cutscene literally devoted to letting you know that the boy can suddenly breathe underwater. For a tragic twist, deny the player's ability or power. So, for example, in Mother 3, the removal of the attack and the final boss. Pretty obvious. Killer 7 introduces, and this one's interesting, invincible enemies at the very end, only defeatable by an unselectable but narratively important character. So at the very end, you're forced to deal with a bunch of enemies that will, right off the bat, just kill off almost all of your party members. Because, you know, that is an easy way of making the character feel depowered. What happens after a rule is broken? Repeatedly breaking that same rule has problems. One, it stops being a surprise the first time around. So doing it the second or the third time is probably a very bad idea. Two, if you try to break a lot of rules, then you create basically what I call the rage game genre, which includes I want to be that guy, Shabon action, etc., where that's exactly what they do. They completely screw over your expectations. And that's not fun for the player. If you have fun playing these games, Lord have your mercy. But anyways, but a broken rule has to either become a new normal or the game has to be clear that it won't repeat it again. Again, notice most of the rule-breaking scenes only happen at the end of these games. Whatever comes after it is just a narrative closing of it. And Inside's approach is, Inside actually breaks the rules a lot. Their approach is, once that broken rule is established, that becomes a new normal. And that's it. Yes, question?
From what I remember of Undertale's final boss battle is, if you die, the game just shuts down, and you have to restart it. So I don't know if you died on that final boss, but maybe you're talking about the final stage of the final boss, but...
The boss name is, if memory serves correct, Azrael Deemer or something like that. But I'm talking about the golden ending final boss, which, yes, correct. The game will just shut down if you fight against Flowey. But fighting against Azrael Dreamer is a very different sequence where it will flat out say, no, you are not getting a game over screen. You're coming right back here and fighting again.